Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with JcrOffroad. Today in the garage we're going to be installing a set of our Crusader rock sliders here on our 2021 Ford Ranger. So in front of me I have our slider mounting legs. These are going to be the first main step in installation. However, before they can go on, we've got to get this factory step out of the way. So I'll get this truck up in the air and we'll show you how that's done. So now underneath the truck, you can see how the factory steps are mounted to the body, kind of on the inside of this rocker. There's 3 mounting legs. Each one has 2 bolts and you'll need a 13mm socket to remove those. The top one on each of these mounts is slotted, so you can kind of just loosen all 3 of the top ones and remove the bottom 3. So once you have that hardware removed, the top bolt's loose, you should be able to just slide this forward, kind of off of those remaining bolts and out of the way. And then you'll just take that factory hardware and reinstall it back into those holes and tighten it up to keep any moisture, dirt, debris, road salt, in our case here in Michigan, out of those holes to prevent any corrosion over time. Now back out here, the truck is ready for the install. I kind of want to walk you through a little bit of information about your mounting brackets. So here I have the front, mid, and rear mount for the driver's side. The passenger side is just a mirror of these, so we'll just kind of go over one side throughout the video. All 3 of these mounts are going to have forward-facing arrows that help you identify kind of the orientation of them and which side they're going to go on, since you're going to be looking for mirrored parts. Each mounting leg kind of has its own key identifiable features. They should be pretty easy to figure out. Both front legs are going to have this front flange bent not quite 90. That's going to mount out on the front body mount when we get it up there on the frame. The mid or center mount is just a 90-degree bracket here. No mounting features or anything out on the ends. And then the rear mount kind of has this angled kick up just because of how it meets the frame there on the vehicle. So that should kind of help you figure out the side and location that these go in. And then we can talk about the mounting nut tabs that I kind of have laid out down here. The nut tabs you're going to receive are going to be numbered kind of 1 through 4. So I have number 1 here. That'll kind of help you identify their locations here on the vehicle. This one is going to go in through the frame, which we'll kind of show you how to install that in just a minute, but it lines up with this front hole here on this main vertical mounting face. And then in any location that you're installing one of these nut tabs, you'll be using one of these 1.5 inch long 1/2 inch hex head bolts with a washer. So you'll just kind of be going through the frame, through the mounting bracket with your bolt and into the nut tab like you see here. The center or mid mount that you see here is the only one that can get a little tricky because not only does it have 2 nut tabs, but they're very similar in design. You can see the main identifying factor will be the length. So the shorter of the 2 that I have here will mount to this front hole, basically in this orientation. So it'll slip through a hole in the frame and line up like so, allowing you to install the bolt through the bracket and the frame. And that leaves the longer one to go in the rear and install in a very similar fashion, kind of through the frame, and then line up with this slotted hole. Then lastly, on the rear mount here, you're kind of looking at it from the inside view, but this nut tab will key in through a hole in the frame that lines up with our cutout there, and then line up with the 2 slots on the mounting bracket like so. Having gone through that little bit of information, we can now grab our front mount and move back underneath the truck. So you'll take your front mount, you'll push it in tight and up tight on the frame, and then slide it as far forward as you can towards this body mount. Then you'll want to take something. I have just a gold Sharpie marker here to mark out this front slot, which we will have to drill out in just a moment. So now that we have that marked, I grabbed a center punch, which you'll want to do in any hole location that we're going to be drilling. We're just going to go as close as possible to the center of that marked slot. And then once you have your hole drilled, that should give you a little bit of extra adjustability to get the hardware installed. For the actual drilling, I just grabbed one of our step bits or unibits. You can use this, you can use a standard kind of conventional twist drill, whatever you have available to you. This works out pretty well because this steps up to 1/2 inch, which is the hole size needed for our hardware. From there, it's just a matter of lining up with that center punch mark and drilling all the way through. So with that drilled out, go ahead and throw your mount back up here and just kind of double check and confirm your hole alignment. If you did get just a little bit off there, it's not a huge deal. You may just have to open that up one more size, and then the 1 inch long 1/2 inch bolt can be installed with a washer, and then on the back side, you'll install a serrated flange nut to kind of start securing this in place. So here underneath the vehicle, in this kind of triangle shaped opening, this is just in front of the transmission cross member where it has kind of this frame tie-in. You'll grab that number 1 nut tab. It is going to slip into an oval shaped hole just above this brake line mounting bracket. There is another hole further forward. If you try to go through that one, you're not going to be able to reach as the nut tab won't be long enough. Now obviously the mount is still very loose at this time, so on the back edge of it, you may or may not be able to see it. I kind of supported it with a jack just to have my hands free for this. You can then work out here to line up your nut tab with this forwardmost vertical slot, and then grab one of your 1.5 inch long 1/2 inch bolts with a washer, kind of slide it through and get it started into the nut tab there. Then in this back slotted hole, you're going to be using that same 1.5 inch bolt and washer combination through here. Then on the inside of the frame, you'll now have to reach through and install a washer and one of those flanged locking nuts from the inside. The slot you're looking for here is going to be behind this factory wire harness connector. This is specific to the driver's side, so you won't have to worry about this over on the other side, but you'll just get behind here with a panel pry tool or possibly even a big screwdriver if that's all you have available. You'll pop this out and just kind of swing it down out of the way temporarily, and then this slotted hole is where we're going to be working. So you kind of want to do these one at a time, so you'll start with the washer. You can feed it in through here and then reach through until you feel that bolt and kind of press the washer on. This may be easier for some people than others. Kind of a handy tool that helps in this location is a small stick magnet like I have here that can help you get the washer on or just help you recover it if you do happen to drop it down in the frame. Then to get that flange nut installed, it may be beneficial to have a flex head wrench or ratcheting wrench like I have here to kind of drop that in and feed it into the bolt. I have had pretty good success just doing it by hand, but that's just a tool that might help you out. So you kind of carefully feed that in the same fashion and reach over toward the bolt to get it started. I'm just kind of applying pressure inward with the bolt and then spinning the bolt as well while you just kind of hold the nut stationary, and then thread that in as far as possible. Now with those 3 bolts started, we're going to have to come back down here and drill 2 more holes. In these locations, you're going to be installing 1/2 inch thread cutting bolts, so you're going to want to drill to 7/16. So just like before, center punch and then drill. We are just going to be drilling through the bracket here, kind of using it as a guide for our hole locations. If you wanted to, you could go through the process of now center punching these, uninstalling it, and then drilling your holes. That's entirely up to you. Once you have both of them drilled out, these are the thread cutting bolts you'll be installing. So they're kind of a flanged hex head. They'll be easily identifiable by this slightly tapered end with kind of the cutting notches basically built right into it. You'll then need a decent impact and a 3/4 socket, and then it's just a matter of applying a little bit of pressure to the back of your impact and running these in. With both of these in, I'm actually just going to back these out a little bit and then actually loosen up the outside mounting hardware just a little as well, because we'll kind of come back and tighten all of this up once the slider is bolted on to all 3 legs. When installing the mid mount, you're going to be looking to line it up with this slot and hole you see here in the side of the frame. I again brought in my jack to just kind of help support this as I slide it into place. You guys could easily kind of do this same thing with a floor jack if you're doing this on the ground in your garage or your driveway. With that kind of loosely lined up there, you can grab the front nut tab. This one will be inserted through the same hole in the frame that you just installed the nut and washer for the back of the front mount. As you feed that back in, you're just looking to line it up with this forward slot and install another 1.5 inch long 1/2 inch bolt. When installing the rear nut tab, you're going to be looking for this kind of horizontal slotted hole just inside of the front edge of the fuel tank here. Like we mentioned before, you'll feed this in and toward the front of the vehicle and line it up with the slot in our bracket out here. Once you have that lined up on the outside, you'll install that same 1/2 inch bolt and washer combination as before. Much like on that front mount, the bottom holes will need to be drilled out. These ones, however, do kind of have factory pilot holes here. They're undersized for those thread cutting bolts, so you will still have to open them up to 7/16. These 3 obviously installed just like before as well, and we can then move on to that rear mount. So by now you guys kind of understand the process in which these install. Here, the location is right where the frame kicks up leading towards the bed and the leaf spring mount. So you'll line that up. Again, I'm just supporting it with my jack to temporarily hold it in place. With that roughly held in place there, you can grab your nut tab. This will slide in through a slot in this kick up portion of the frame back here. And then just like before, you're feeding it out toward the side and installing your 1.5 inch long hardware. At this point, you can probably guess we've got 2 slotted holes here in the bottom of the bracket. You'll then have to drill and install 2 more of those 1/2 inch thread cutting bolts. Now that we have the mounts installed on the frame, we can come out here and grab kind of the main slider assembly as well as this lower skid. The easiest place to start really is just dropping this down inside of the skid and then lining up the mounting holes. You should have 4 along this outside edge, 4 more here on the inside, and in those locations you'll be installing black 5/16 button head bolts with serrated flange nuts. You'll want to get all of these started by hand before you really go any further. With those started, you can grab a 3/16 hex, T-handle, Allen wrench, whatever you have available, and tighten up all that mounting hardware holding the skid to the slider. You can also install the clip nuts into the slider at this time. You're going to have 2 different sizes of these. The larger ones are 5/16 and go into the lower mounting holes down here, and the smaller ones are going to be M6 and will use the 5 mounting holes up on this back flange. When you install these, they should just kind of start and slide right into the hole with an audible click, and that way you know they're placed properly. Lastly, you can install the rock lights or step lights out into each end of your slider. If yours are equipped with this blue kind of plastic cover, go ahead and peel that off first. And then you'll want to find the kind of small diameter number 8 bolts or screws and nylock nuts to go along with them. There should be plenty of room in the back side of the slider cut out here to feed both the light and a nut up into position here, and then you'll install the bolt from the outside and get that started. We'll do the same thing down here. You'll then need a 3/32 hex and 11/32 socket or wrench to hold the nut on the inside, and you can go ahead and tighten this up. Just kind of pay attention as you're tightening these up to make sure that you're tightening them evenly so that the light sits nice and flat against the inside face of your slider. You can then repeat this process over on the other end. This is now ready to go on the vehicle. For that, you're going to be using more 1/2-inch hardware. These are only going to be 1 inch long, obviously with washers as well. These are going to go through the back of the mount and then into the back side of the slider here, and then your serrated flange nuts will go on the inside, kind of like that. So with something down to protect it, I just used a couple microfibers here. I'll now lift this into place on the hoist arms and we'll show you that going on. If you're doing this on the ground using a floor jack or something, just kind of do the same. Make sure you have something to protect the finish on here as it's going into place. At this point, you're just starting the 4 bolts through the 4 holes on your bracket and the 4 slots on the slider. So we can kind of lift this up into position and get one of these started. Just be careful not to damage, dent, or scratch the truck up there. Make sure you have plenty of clearance. With one of those started on this end, I'll just go down to the other side and do the same thing to kind of lift it roughly up into position. After doing that, it's just a matter of coming through now and installing the remaining 10 bolts. Once you have all that mounting hardware started, you'll need a 3/4 socket to tighten those up. At this point, you also want to kind of take a step back and look at it from front to rear, because you do have all your adjustability in the slots here on the slider. What I found looks best and kind of most centered on the wheel openings is all the way back on this slot. But again, this is just a personal preference thing. At this point, there's no right or wrong to this step. So once you've done that and you're happy with it, go ahead and tighten all 12 of the mounting bolts holding the slider to the mounting legs. With that tight, you can then come back under the truck here and tighten your mounts to the frame. Again, this is just your 3/4 socket. The only thing to really pay attention to here is making sure you're getting them drawn both up and into the side kind of evenly, so you might have to alternate back and forth just a little bit. And of course, just don't forget at this time to come back and snap this wire harness back into the frame. Then coming back out here, you can now install the step tray and the logo tread plate. The step tray should just kind of slide down into your slider assembly on the one end. You can then slip it back in and slide it back down to line up all your mounting holes. Starting in the back, you'll find the smaller M6 button heads. You'll want to put washers on these, and you can start those into those clip nuts we installed earlier on. Then the tread plate can slide into position on here. Again, line up your holes, and then for this you're using more of the larger 5/16 button head bolts. You have washers to put on these as well, and I believe I forgot to mention it earlier on, you should be putting washers on them when you're installing them for the lower skid. With all that hardware started along the back and the bottom, you'll need a 4mm hex to tighten these up and kind of draw this tray back, and then your 3/16 hex to tighten the bottom hardware. At that point, you're just about done. If you haven't done so already or haven't been working on both sides at the same time, you can now jump over to the passenger side and kind of repeat that installation process on the passenger side slider. The only thing then left to do would be to wire in your lights. How you do that is really entirely up to you. You can wire them in on your dome light circuit. You can wire them in as accessory lights on a switch or rock lights. It really just depends on your specific preference and build configuration. Other than that, if you guys have any questions at all about this installation or anything else we offer here at JCR Off-Road, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always email us at info@jcroffroad.com or call us at 269-353-1184.